Good to see you here this morning. If you want to get out your Bibles, turn to Galatians. Galatians chapter 5 is where we'll be studying from this morning. Taking a little time to transition, kind of swap between Acts and Galatians. Now, Acts is on the PM and Galatians is in the AM. Really just doing that because I love these messages so much, and I love the PM message too. And I was really conflicted today, but I really wanted this message to come through to all of those, especially who are unable to be here on Sunday night. What do we need to do when someone around us is out of step with the truth? Think about that for a second. What do we need to do when someone around us is out of step with the truth? What do we do when people are out of step with the truth? Now, what do we need to do and what do we do? They should be the same thing, right? I mean, that should be the same. But really, in some ways, this is a really hard thing for us to navigate. How do we speak to someone who is not living the life that they're supposed to live? That's not an easy topic to bring up to somebody or to talk to somebody about. And in some ways, it's much easier for us to just kind of keep our distance, right? That's much more comfortable, less risky, more safe. After all, we could be wrong. We could be being overly judgmental. We could be making assumptions about them that we don't really know what's going on in their life and their heart. We don't know why it is that they're doing whatever it is that they're doing. So keeping our distance definitely seems like the best overall approach. It would be really sad if we accused somebody of doing something that they didn't do. We don't want to do that. But texts like Luke 17, 1 through 4, texts like Matthew 18 tell us that we're supposed to go to the person and speak to them about what they're doing. We're supposed to rebuke those who are out of step with the truth. And that requires us to get out of our comfort zone, right? For someone who has lost their way. And that correction is not something that we really want to do. If we aren't careful, things could blow up. People could get mad and get their feelings hurt because, let's be honest, I don't like to hear that I'm wrong and that I'm stupid. And in some cases, it don't matter how you say what you say. I don't have enough self-esteem in myself to hear that critique without blowing up. That's really a me problem. So we know that those kind of things are likely to happen, and yet the Scriptures are trying to tell us to speak to those who are out of step with the truth. I find that to be one of the most difficult things for me to do in my life, and maybe you struggle with that too. Maybe some of you are here like, if they're doing something wrong, I'm going to just tell them. I admire your boldness. But this lesson's for you too, in that you shouldn't do it the wrong way. And if you're here and you've got this kind of attitude, maybe like I've got here's somebody who's out of step with the truth. Do I really go to them? Do I really need to talk to them? Maybe I'm assuming something wrong. I'm kind of afraid that it's going to blow up and that it's not going to be received well, and so maybe I shouldn't do it. If you're in that boat, this lesson's for you as well. As we study Galatians chapter 5 and 6 this morning, we're going to see really Paul's help for us in approaching a brother or sister who is out of step with the truth. As a preacher, I get quite a few critiques. I have in the past, and I'll share one with you just for the fun of it. So I was at a smaller congregation whenever I just started preaching, and everything was going great, and then they were like, hey, let's have a little meeting in the back. I'm like, okay, we go in the back, we do our little meeting, and they're talking about supporting people, and everything's going well, and then they got one more thing they want to share with me, and the guy, completely cordial and nice, says, "You're preaching too long." Just like that. Okay. Thank you for that information. I didn't know any better, right? I mean, I listen to sermons on my podcasts every day on the way to work and every day on the way back. All of those sermons are 40 minutes long, and I assume I'm supposed to preach for 40 minutes. I didn't realize that I'm not experienced enough to really hold anyone's attention for 40 minutes at that point in my life, and that I'm not really that good. So it's kind of like torture for 40 minutes. So it needed to be said, right? I mean, it needed to be said. I don't doubt that. But the way it was said is kind of a problem. And maybe you've had similar instances in your life, and you have to decide what to do whenever you receive that kind of critique. Well, let's listen to what Paul says. He's been writing to the Galatians, telling them about something that's wrong in their congregation, okay? And this letter has been a little bit heated at times. He said, "Oh, foolish Galatians," he said that kind of stuff. And it's been comforting at times. He says, "I'm confident that you will listen and do the things that I'm teaching you to do." But as he said all these things to try to fight against false teachers that are among them, that are leading them away from the faith and the gospel, he's trying to help them understand the truth. And so it's very important for him to step in and say, "Listen, what you're doing and what you're thinking is out of step with the gospel. It's not right, and you're being led astray. You're falling away from grace," he says. So he tells them the truth, and now at this part, he has a message really for all those who believe what he said and are now having to deal with the fact that they're surrounded by a congregation that is a mixed group of people who believe what he said and people who have taught the false teaching. And he tries to give them advice for how to handle those around him who are out of step with the truth and help them understand. Last time we looked at the fruit of the Spirit, and we saw that that's supposed to be what's inside of us, that we are developing the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. All those things are supposed to be developed inside of us so that we are like Christ, having crucified our flesh and our desires to do the works of the flesh and living as Christ has us live. And verse 25, it says, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another." He says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load." So let's talk about this text for just a little bit. Notice first, he says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. He said earlier that we're supposed to walk by the Spirit, verse 16. He said we're supposed to be led by the Spirit in verse 18. Now he says, if we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. So there's this continual image throughout this that we're walking by, we're being led by, we're following after the way of the Spirit. And he says here, if we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And that live by the Spirit is referring to spiritual life. The Holy Spirit has provided for us the means of spiritual life. And we have put our faith in that and received the gift of the Holy Spirit, eternal life, adoption as God's children. And he says, if that's you, if you have life because of the work of God in the Spirit revealing Jesus' work, then let us keep in step with the Spirit. Okay. How do we keep in step with the Spirit? If we've received salvation, the expectation is that because we now live, that we would now walk with God, that we would now live the life that God has called us to live. How do we do that? How do we keep in step with the Spirit? Look at the next verse. Verse 26, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Notice how he answers the question that we might have, how do we keep in step with the Spirit? By telling us how we do not keep in step with the Spirit. Do not become conceited. Do not start to think that life is about me and serving myself and doing the things that benefit me. That is out of step with the Spirit. If my life is all about my success and my relationships that make me feel good and my toys and my wonderful blessings in my life, it's out of step with the Spirit. It's conceited, and that's not the way the Spirit has taught us to live. He says you're not supposed to be provoking one another. You're not supposed to be envying one another. That's out of step with the Spirit. Walking in step with the Spirit is loving our neighbor more and loving ourselves less. That is in step with the Spirit. That is the life that God has called us to live. And so then he gives us an example that relates to what I said in the introduction. Verse 1, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Think about the first words there. If anyone is caught in any transgression. Notice it doesn't say if anyone sins. It's not that simple statement, if anyone sins. In other words, it's not really giving us permission to nitpick and see, oh, you sinned, I got to get you. You know, I got to come and tell you about your sin. There's a picture that's given to us here, right? There's a brother who's caught in a transgression. If you've been in social media and stuff, maybe one of those things that have popped up on your screen is that picture of that sweet little wild deer or animal or whatever that's like all tangled up in barbed wire. And these very nice, men or women, they come up to this wild animal that's kind of crazy and scared. And they cut the barbed wire away and they let the deer go free, kind of risking, themselves, because that could hurt them. I've even seen one where there was a bear who had a bucket stuck on its head. And it was like running around the whole neighborhood with his bucket stuck on its head. And these nice people decided to actually save the bear from obviously being hit by a car or being killed by another predator. They capture the bear and they cut the bucket off and they release the bear. I've seen a mountain lion even, and they had like protection to prevent themselves from being bitten or hurt by the mountain lion. But they cut it away, and that animal runs free. And it's amazing. The animal's terrified and like fighting for a period of time, but then once you cut it away, it runs free, and everything is good again. That's that picture that we see here. When a brother is caught in any transgression, Satan catches and he holds on. He catches us with our fleshly desires, our passions. And once he gets his hands around us, that barbed wire around us, he doesn't want to let go. And we have brethren sometimes who fall into that, and maybe we ourselves fall into that, where we're stuck. And we're caught, and we need to get out. Well, what do we do when our brother is caught? What are we going to do? Well, he gives us 4 things to do in these verses. First of all, he says, restore them with gentleness. Now, I could just imagine one of us being caught with barbed wire all around us. And another one of us come up to them, and we grab them by the head, and we just start pulling. That wouldn't feel very good, would it? That would be rough. That would cause more damage than help, right? That image is given to us here. Restore them in a spirit of gentleness. Gentleness, tenderness. Notice that is a fruit of the Spirit. That you would be gentle, that you would be tender with the person who is caught in a snare. That you would try to help them get out of it in a way that does not hurt them or cause them more pain. But people are a lot like that wild animal. They're scared. As we approach another person to try to help them when they're caught, they're scared about what you might do. I mean, that animal is vulnerable, right? They're vulnerable whenever they're locked up like that. They can't escape. And if another wild animal wanted to come in, they could just destroy them. And so they're scared. And so very clearly, Paul says we should be restoring them with gentleness. And you might say, well, I've tried that. I've been gentle. And then they fought against me. And so I had to get them down and try to pull it off because that's all that I could do. That's causing damage. Again, it causes damage. Gentleness is what will give them peace in allowing us to unsnare them, to set them free. Gentle answers are important, even though they react and respond in a way that seems harsh, gentle, ungentle, very, damaging or dangerous. Gentleness turns away wrath. And we also, if you remember that it's a bear, we might get hurt in this. We have to be vulnerable and make ourselves vulnerable in order to do this, in order to be gentle. Consider what God has done for us. How he has come to us in the form of a man and very gently revealed to us our sin. Very gently revealed to us our imperfection, and how he was willing to be vulnerable to the point of allowing us to kill him. So Paul says, restore them with gentleness. The next thing he says is, keep watch on yourselves, lest you too be tempted. I was thinking about that and trying to understand what he's getting at as he says, keep watch on yourselves. And as you really think about it, if a brother or sister is caught, like the Galatians are caught with a false teaching or something like that, or maybe some sin that has ensnared them, they fell into that trap because they thought that was a good idea. And as they're sitting there vulnerable and they're exposed and they're suffering, they may justify what they've done. And they may act like they're free and act like everything's okay. I imagine that's exactly what the Galatian Christians are doing as they're claiming the false teachings that they believe are true. And so Paul says, keep watch on yourselves, lest you too be tempted. Maybe there's like some sweet treat that they went for, and you might think, oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I want that too. And they gave the justification. You might think, well, I can get it without falling into a trap, or maybe it's okay to be in this trap, or something along those lines. He says, be careful. I've seen too many times Christians trying to go and to correct someone who is in error, and they end up falling into the same error. Because their reasoning and because of their intellect and because of their rationale, because they understand what the truth is, and so they follow after that. And I want you to see what Paul is saying here is we need to be careful to make sure that we're continuing to hold true to what the true gospel is. We're continuing to hold true to what was originally taught to us by the apostles and by Jesus. That those things are the truth, and be very careful not to be led astray from those things as you are trying to restore your brother who has fallen away from those things. It's not something that's an easy thing for us to do, and it's something that actually can be very dangerous for us. And after hearing that, you might think, well, I don't really want to do that. Satan is crafty. And he could get us, and he could steer us away from what the truth is, and we don't want that. And so we might think, like looking at that wild animal, I don't want to get near it. It's going to attack me, and it could kill me. I could get caught in the same trap. I could get wrapped up in the barbed wires. I'm trying to get them unwrapped. We have to make sure, though, that we have the right heart, that we have the right spirit. We have to be very careful that we don't become proud, because we're so strong that we can help somebody else will fall. It's funny how, there's a lot of cases where you're trying to tell somebody, you're too judgmental and harsh. You're too proud. And our tendency might be to become judgmental and harsh and proud against the person who is acting that way. That happens a lot as well. So we have to keep watch. And you might think, well, that's too much. I don't want to get involved in that. It'll just make things worse. But he tells us next, bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. Bear one another's burdens. The idea of a burden is the idea of a heavy weight, a crushing weight that is on top of somebody. And he says, bear one another's burdens. Whatever it is that is crushing them, we need to be willing to get up underneath them and lift that weight up so that they can run free. So that they can go on to doing whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing. So that they can go on to living a life that is pleasing to God and that glorifies God. Lifting a burden is hard. It's heavy, It's burdensome. Maybe I don't want to lift a burden today. That's a lot of work, A lot of times we might think, I don't have enough time to help that person. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough ability. I don't have enough fill in the blank. But aren't we really saying, I don't want to be burdened with that? We like to live a comfortable life, a life free from burden, a life free from struggles. It's much easier and it's much more satisfying and enjoyable if we don't have to take on other people's burdens. But aren't you glad that God came and took our burdens? It's Isaiah 53. It's what we studied not too long ago. He came and he carried away our griefs and our sorrows. He bore the burden of our sins being inflicted against him. That we punished him, even though he was good. He was willing to be burdened. He had a great eternity in God with all the things that you could possibly imagine, free from worry and care or anything like that. And he gave it all up in order to come down to earth and be burdened for us. To restore our brother who is caught in a transgression. We need to understand it's going to be burdensome. It's going to be burdensome. I'm going to have to devote some time to this. I'm going to have to devote some money maybe or give up some money because I could be using my time to make more money even though I've got enough in order to sacrifice and to devote my time to lifting up my brother. If our brother is suffering and they're weighed down and they're crushed, how could we just stand by and let that happen? That's what sin is doing in the hearts of those around us who are caught in a transgression. It's crushing them. Next, he says, test your work. Verse 4, let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor, for each will have to bear his own load. Test your work. If you think you're something when you're nothing, you're deceiving yourself. Test your work. Maybe you're one that is willing to go and to correct people and to tell people everything that they're doing wrong. Well, think about yourself a little bit. Think about your work. Think about whether or not that was really beneficial. Maybe our MO is to say, well, they didn't believe because it's their fault and they're hard-hearted and they're not doing the right thing and they don't really care about God and they don't really love God like I do. Well, test your work. Think about it for a second. Did we approach them with love and with gentleness and with patience and kindness? Did we have self-control as we were speaking? Or did we just say whatever we felt like and then said, I'm just saying this because I love you? That doesn't make up for the harshness and the judgmentalness. To just say, I'm just saying this because I love you. Well, no. If you loved me, you would have taken the time to formulate the gentle and caring and kind and considerate, and you would have thought about how I would feel as those words were coming out of your mouth. We can speak the truth without love. And we need to be careful to make sure that we're not doing that. Test your work. Test your work. Don't think that you're something when you're nothing. Don't think you know everything about everything and that you have the right to tell everybody else what they're doing wrong. But be gentle and humble. Humble, humility. That's a word that's very important in all of this. We have to be humble. Notice what he says, though. He says, then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. It almost sounds like, then you can boast, you know. If you tested your work and you've seen that I've been gentle and I've been patient and I've been kind, and the truth is they just refuse to listen, then there's a sense in which you can take pride that you have the fruit of the Spirit is in you, that you are actually doing the things that God has told you to do. You're living like Christ, and that this person is so ensnared, and they choose to be ensnared. They don't want freedom from the sins that they're entangled with. Then you have a reason to boast in yourself, maybe. But really, can we boast? Can we boast? No. We can't boast. Skip down a little bit and notice what he says in verse 12. It is those who want to make a good showing in the flesh who would force you to be circumcised in order that they might not be persecuted for the cross of Christ. Verse 14, but far be it from me to boast except in the cross of the Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. This is the fruit of the Spirit, right? This is the working of God that gives me the ability to speak gently or kindly or be patient. It's not because of me and my ability. It's because God has developed in me the character that I need. I love how at the end here he says, each will have to bear his own load. After saying, bear one another's burdens, now he says, each will have to bear his own load. And if you're like me, maybe for a while you kind of justified not bearing other people's burdens because it says each one will have to bear his own load. But as I was studying, I found out bearing a burden is not the same thing as bearing a load. The burden is a picture of a crushing weight that you can't lift and you can't move. A load is like a backpack, something that you're supposed to be carrying and should have the ability and the strength to carry. Our brother who is caught in a transgression cannot carry their load. And it's our job, it's our load to bear their burden, to get them out from under it so that they can carry their own load. That's what we're here for. That's what God has called us to do. And he says, so fulfill the law of Christ. This is the law of Christ. Loving your neighbor as I have loved you is what Jesus says. That's our law. You want to know what our law is that we have to keep and make sure that we're on top of all the time? There's one big check mark for us. Restore the erring brother. Love your brethren as God has loved you, as Jesus has loved you. And then boast in the cross that brought you to that level of understanding and maturity to where you would be able to do that for somebody else. He says, you who are spiritual should restore them. Are you spiritual? Then it's your job. It's your load to help those around us. So as we study this text, we see the Galatian brethren have been caught in a snare. It's throughout this book. Very obvious. They've been caught in a snare. Paul takes the time to write this detailed letter and try to explain to them how they're caught in a snare and how they must get out from the snare. He uses strong language when he needs to, but he has gentleness and patience as he's writing it to try to help them understand You got to get out of the snare. And then he helps those who believe Paul by preparing them to go and to restore these brethren with kindness and gentleness, not with judgment and harshness and being ruthless and trying to condemn them, but trying to help them get free. If we're divisive and we're harsh, we become just as bad as the person who we're trying to rebuke. Now there's not one brother caught in a transgression. We both are. So we must be spiritual and restore them with a spirit of gentleness. Do you struggle with this? Is restoring brethren, do you see how hard that is? Do you see how that's not something we want to do? Let me ask you this. Let's think about this for a second. What happens if we neglect this? What happens if no one restores anyone else in the congregation? Error just multiplies. Error just multiplies. It just spreads throughout the whole group. It doesn't get any better. It gets way, way worse. But what happens if we do it wrong? Same thing. Error multiplies. It gets worse and worse and worse. We have to be very careful about doing this, making sure that we are at that spiritual maturity level where we're capable of doing this, but also doing it the right way. Making sure that we don't have a plank in our eye as we're trying to pull a splinter out of a brother's eye, right? Making sure that we're not sitting back and throwing stones. Remember what Jesus said? The one of you that's without sin, you go ahead and throw the first stone, right? We're not going to do that, okay? We're going to restore them with gentleness. So we need humility, we need love, and we need to think about how would I want to be treated if I were caught in the same snare. Now in closing, I have another word for those of you who are in a transgression right now, okay? You're doing something you shouldn't do. What if somebody comes to you after this and they try to correct you? How are you going to respond to that person who has stepped out of their comfort zone to speak to you? And what if they do it the wrong way? I mean, you probably experienced that in the past, and you're here, so that shows you've got some patience with people and you're willing to keep coming, right? A lot of people will hear that and just dart, right? You're here. Well, we should respond, first of all, by loving that person for stepping out of their comfort zone. They love you enough to speak to you. And if they do it the wrong way and it's not very loving, God bless them. You know, I wish they would grasp this concept. But hopefully after this lesson, everybody will be fixed, right? That's not going to happen. It really takes practice to do this. I would raise my voice just because I'm uncomfortable, and it might come across wrong. So we need patience. As someone corrects us, we need to take their concern very seriously and love them for just stepping out of their comfort zone and loving me enough to talk to me about what they're seeing. Maybe they're completely wrong, but they're concerned enough to talk to us, and there could be some nugget of truth in what they're saying. And our goal is to be like Christ, so, they're helping. It's better than them being silent about it and misunderstanding something. It gives us an opportunity to clarify. But, if you're like some people I know who, that idea of criticism would just crush them. The idea that somebody would tell me I'm doing something wrong, my life is over, I'm a perfectionist and I'm trying to do everything right. If that's you, remember, okay? God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble, okay? So if it hurts your feelings and you're just that sensitive person that can't stand for anything to be wrong in your life, you're never going to grow unless you let people correct you, unless you respond the right way when people do it. They're never going to do it again if you respond the wrong way. And really inside, there's pride in that. You don't want to be wrong. we're all wrong. We're all sinners. We all make mistakes. And remember, God gives grace to us. That's what we rely on, is God's grace to forgive us where we make the mistakes. So, if you're here, and these words have been, maybe hurtful to you as you have maybe stumbled in some of these areas, I hope that you'll understand God's grace is available even for you. It's available even for me, as I have done that plenty of times and not been as gentle as I ought to be. And if you're here and you don't know the salvation that is offered to us because of God's graciousness, we want you to know that it's available to every single person on earth who is willing to turn their lives to Him and devote themselves to Him. If you know what you need to do and you're willing, please come as we stand and as we sing.